Good afternoon, everyone. We'll just give a few seconds here to let everybody join in, and then we'll get started. All right, so hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Michelle Bertholet, and I'm the publisher of Top Crop Manager. I'm joined today by Trevor Herzog, Western Canada's agronomy lead with Corteva, Tammy Jones, technical sales agronomist, and Kirsten Ratzlaff, product marketing manager. This trio will be discussing Utrisha N nutrient efficiency biostimulant. And before I turn it over, we just have a couple of housekeeping items to cover. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available to all attendees and registrants approximately 24 hours after our live broadcast. The session is scheduled to run for approximately 45 to 60 minutes, including questions. And if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to type them into the Q&A tab found at the bottom of your computer screen. This webinar has been approved for 0.5 CCA CEUs in nutrient management, and further instructions for submission via QR code will be addressed after the question and answer period. Without further ado, I'll let you take it away, Kirsten.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Michelle. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. I just want to say before we get started, a big thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to be here with us today. And then also just want to extend a thank you to Top Crop Manager for the opportunity to talk about Utrisha N and overall the use of nutrient biostimulants. So certainly appreciate the opportunity. So as Michelle has mentioned, today we are really pleased to be able to talk a little bit about Utrisha N, and we want to spend a little bit of time talking about nitrogen and the use of nutrient biostimulants within that as well. So that's ultimately where we'll start, and Trevor will present and talk a little bit about that. We'll spend some time introducing Utrisha N and certainly want to take you through some of the field data and our couple of years of experience with Utrisha N here across Canada in the field. Tammy's going to take us through some application information, and certainly then we want to wrap up and talk a little bit about Corteva biologicals and really the entire portfolio and what the value that is certainly meant to provide for all of you. So that is the plan for today. As Michelle mentioned, if you've got questions, please certainly put them in the Q&A. We'll be happy to address those as well. So with that, I'll start and turn it over to Trevor Herzog.
Thanks, Kirsten, and yeah, thanks for everybody attending today to spend a short period of time with us to talk about Utrisha. So as Kirsten said, my component of the slides today is just to talk a little bit about nitrogen. It's going to be, pretty high level in the amount of time that we have. Just wanted to, reiterate a few things that probably most of us on the call already know, and that is that nitrogen is an essential macronutrient. And most crops, in the world, it would be the primary nutrient that affects, of course, yield and overall plant health. One of the things that we need to keep reminding ourselves on, and if we know our crops need nitrogen, but what does it actually do for our crops, and why is it so important? And, it is a key component. And what it helps us do is, or helps the plants do is produce amino acids that will form those building blocks for proteins and enzymes within the plant. The amino acids, that really is the building block. The proteins are there to help make up the structural material of those plants. And enzymes, all they really do is facilitate any of the reactions that are required in the plant in order to, grow and produce seed. Another key component of nitrogen is its role in chlorophyll production. And chlorophyll, when we think of chlorophyll, that's the green representation you see in a nice healthy plant. And as soon as you start to see a less healthy plant, it probably will lose some of that chlorophyll content. Chlorophyll, again, what that helps the plant do is allows the plant to capture sunlight through photosynthesis, which in turn drives yield and plant health. And anybody that's sat down with a farmer or farmers, making your fertility plans, you're going to be referring to, how much yield do I expect from my crop and how much nitrogen do I need to help that crop maybe achieve that. And there's a few examples on the screen here where, for example, corn, 1 bushel of corn is around around a pound of nitrogen required to help it get there. That's available nitrogen. With canola, a bushel needs about 3.5 pounds of available nitrogen. Wheat, 2.5 pounds of nitrogen. Each crop will have its own sort of nitrogen recommendation, and can be easily, found these days by talking to your local agronomist or, a simple search on the web. So again, nitrogen is very critical to our crops and is something we need to consider in order to make sure we become profitable on our acres that we're farming. It is one of the most important important inputs that we have. Already said it maximizes yield and plant health, but it's also one of the most costly. And so how do we manage that? When you're pricing out fertilizer, the one thing that comes up all the time is, well, when do I price it? How do I price it? Have I priced it at the right time? Have I made my purchases of nitrogen and the other fertility program requirements we have on the farm? Did I do that at the right time? That becomes pretty hard to manage, and it's hard to budget for. And but it has to happen every year. Applied nitrogen, that can be lost to the environment. Nitrogen can move away from the root zone too quickly, and then it would fall into a period of potential deficiency for a short period of time until those roots can start accessing that again. That can happen through leaching, maybe denitrification, maybe a few other ways. The thing that maybe we don't quite realize sometimes is nitrogen losses can approach 25% of that applied nitrogen, could reach 50 to 60% in some situations or areas of the field. Our fields are quite variable rating, fertility, and maybe other things that certainly helped out with that, but losses are always there. And that becomes a great opportunity for a product like Utrisha to help out with that crop. Go ahead there, Kirsten, to the next slide. So one other important thing that is key to remember when we start talking about a product like Utrisha is that 78% of the Earth's atmosphere is made up of nitrogen, but it's pretty well unavailable to plants because it's atmospheric nitrogen N2. And, that means that it is one of the most abundant elements on Earth. However, just because it's abundant doesn't mean the plants can always use it. So, I have a slide here showing a few N deficiency symptoms for some of our major crops, and maybe a minor crop there. The one picture is actually potatoes. And, the plant will use all the nitrogen it can get and has access to. Nitrogen itself is quite mobile in the plant, but if you start to, see symptoms in the field similar to some of the pictures you see on the screen here, it would show itself a little bit different in various crops, but really it's the oldest leaves that we need to go back to and look at. And if you start seeing older leaves, maybe not showing that nice dark green chlorophyll content, it could be an indication that there's a period of time where that crop is suffering through a nitrogen deficiency. And, there's various ways to check on that to confirm that, but it is something to keep a watchful eye on. So when do crops require nitrogen? Well, they actually require it at all stages of growth, but there is a ramp up in nutrient demand. You'll see a picture here showing corn. The next slide would show the same picture for other crops in Western Canada. But the main point of both this slide and the next one would be that nitrogen demand does increase in the early summer as crops start to, go into reproductive stages and then eventually to maturity. And many factors can lead to nitrogen loss. One way to address that would be with a product like a nitrogen stabilizer, like Optinite from Corteva. But there also is another component that we're mainly focused on today, a product like Utrisha, which supplies that supplemental nitrogen to crops at the time when the crop will actually need it. And again, a key component of this message would be there's a lot of variability within our field. And in most fields in Western Canada, we're still applying the same amount of nitrogen across the entire field as a blanket application. And that might mean that parts of that field are running into a deficiency. A product like Utrisha, as we'll learn here today, can help make sure the plant across your entire farm is meeting all the nitrogen requirements that it has. And so in this slide here, just wanted to focus in on spring wheat and canola, peas, lentils. You can start to see that demand for nitrogen start to ramp up sort of, mid to late June for most of these crops. And you think about the staging, that's probably for most crops when they start to get somewhat close to ground cover and growth really starts to take off. And, that's when we need to make sure that Utrisha is present. There's various stages through the season of what nitrogen's role actually is in the plant, going from reproduction to, going from vegetative stage to reproductive stage and moving nitrogen into the seed. But that ramp up really starts sort of mid-June in Western Canada. So what does it boil down to? We really need to think about the 4 R's when it comes to nitrogen stewardship. And how does Utrisha address that? Well, let's talk about right source. Utrisha converts that atmospheric nitrogen to ammonium, which then provides nitrogen directly to the crop. The right rate. So Utrisha works by making sure that there's no limitation or overproduction, let's say, of nitrogen. And when the plant requires nitrogen through a biological product like Utrisha, we are ensuring that the plant has exactly what it needs when it needs it across the entire field. What about the right time? So it's a great source of supplemental nitrogen for the entire season. You don't have to worry about risk of leaching or volatilization or the plant being short of nitrogen in any way, shape, or form. Not to say that it'll make up a complete deficiency, but it certainly will be there to ensure that there's at least some source of nitrogen getting to the plant as it needs it. And then the right place. So Utrisha will get applied right to the leaves, right to the plant. And as you can see by the demand curves of a plant, Utrisha applied probably in that ground cover stage when you have the most green in the plant and not a lot of soil left showing, that would be probably a key time to start thinking about applying nitrogen. And we'll hear more about application timing here later on in the presentation. So just quickly, that's the nuts and bolts on nitrogen, and I will pass it over back to you, Kirsten.
Thank you, Trevor. Okay, with that, so after covering off and really talking a lot about nitrogen and the importance and some of the limitations, I'd like to spend some time talking about Utrisha N, introducing the product and how it works and how it can really be that supplemental source, as Trevor talked about, to really round out your nitrogen program and ensure your crops have what it needs for nitrogen when and how it needs it. So Utrisha N is a nutrient efficiency biostimulant. So a biostimulant is a type of biological. And so we look at the purpose of biostimulants, and really what they intend to do is that these are biologicals that will trigger the plant's natural processes, really to enhance the plant's overall performance and resilience. So in one way being nutrient efficiency, which is what Utrisha N does. So it contains a natural bacteria. That bacteria is called Methylbacterium symbioticum. And what it does, as Trevor mentioned, is really fix that nitrogen, that already existing abundance of nitrogen that's currently in the atmosphere that is in an unusable form to the plant, and converts it into that usable form for the plant. And it does that very continuously throughout the crop cycle as it continues to provide nitrogen that it captures from the air and converts it right throughout the entire crop season. So that plant really gets that constant flow of nitrogen in a very regulated way. To look a little bit more into how Utrisha works, and we'll talk a little bit about application and some key details to really ensure you get a great application experience with Utrisha N. But essentially, Utrisha N will enter the plant through the stomata and then begin to very quickly colonize in the leaf cells, and then it will start to do just that work of capturing that existing nitrogen and converting it to a usable form for the plant. And so I'll talk a little bit more in detail in the next couple of slides, but I think really a really neat attribute to this is that it really does all of this work and supplies that supplemental source without taking any plant energy in the process. So no energy is required. The plant is still continuing to grow and be productive while this process is happening alongside of it. So it's just a little bit of a deeper dive. I've talked a little bit about this bacteria, but just to give you a little bit more information as to how this works. So if we look at the plant and really the avenue for absorption here being the stomata, you'll note that there's really a natural byproduct of plant growth is methanol. And so in this bacteria instance, this methanol is released to the stomata and will actually begin to attract this methylbacterium. So really, as a result, we get that quick colonization into the plant, but also this methanol really serves as ultimately the food source for Utrisha N. And so in this way, the bacteria or Utrisha N will continue to thrive and be active and bring nitrogen for the plant, all while living off this natural byproduct that the plant already produces as it continues to grow. So you can see that here in the image is a really nice, very microscopic image of the stomata, and you can see these pink Utrisha bacteria ultimately being attracted in through the methanol and ultimately into the stomata, and then will begin to colonize within the plant. And as we look a little bit deeper into the colonization process, I mentioned that this is a very quick process after application. So we know that colonization, or really complete colonization, can be achieved really as little as 3 days. It's a very quick process. And as you can see here in the image as well, while it continues to colonize, it will actually begin to rapidly divide. So this isn't a very aggressive type of natural bacteria. So will aggressively grow and divide, but also grow into or move and colonize and divide into actively growing portions of the plant. So you'll see that even as the plant continues to grow and produce more leaf material, the bacteria will continue to divide and move into new growth. And so you can see as it continues to do that, remains at a very abundant population and continuing to capture and convert and provide nitrogen to the plant right throughout that life cycle. And as Trevor noted earlier, when we think about that increased need for nitrogen as the plant continues to grow and be productive, that's a really important detail to this product. So providing that usable nitrogen source right throughout the entire life cycle of the plant. And so really, what does this mean? And we go back to, the talk that we gave we talked a little bit about nitrogen and the importance and that need in throughout the life cycle, but also really noting that, our conventional sources of nitrogen are completely critical sources, but there is some risk to loss or simply not being in the right place at the right time. And so Utrisha N is really, I would say, a very beautiful complementary source to our conventional nitrogen program. And as a result, gives that sustainable supplemental source that will reduce the dependency on a single source of nitrogen. So really gives a very nice program approach to ensuring that our plants have nitrogen where and when it needs it throughout the life cycle. So beyond that being a very sustainable supplemental source, of course, Utrisha providing nitrogen from the air in a very natural way, providing a nitrogen source that has no risk to leaching or denitrification or greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a very natural, sustainable source of nitrogen, and really a very nice complement as we build a very strong fertility program right throughout the growing season alongside our conventional nitrogen. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tammy. She's going to talk about the experience, what we've seen with Utrisha, and then how to use it most efficiently.
Fantastic. So there is a question in the chat that maybe someone wants to take a look at, or we can address later. So taking a closer look at the field data, because I think that that's the exciting part of it. The concept is nice, but what does that look like in the field? So on the first slide here, there we go. So if we look at the canola yield results, this is a compilation of both the 2021 and 2022 yield results for canola across Western Canada, so 43 site years on large scale trials where we're looking at Utrisha N applied, hopefully at the right time, but not really strictly controlled versus the untreated check. And by large scale, we're probably talking 40 acres on most of them, sometimes 80 acres splitting a field, that sort of thing, to get a real feel for what's going on in the field. And I think we should recognize too that in 2021, for a large portion of Western Canada at least, and possibly as much in some of the eastern areas as well, there was some limitations on moisture, which means that nitrogen might not have been the yield limiting factor in some of those trials. Given that, we have noted that there is approximately, well, there's not approximately, there's a 63% win rate with the trials that were done in 2021 and 2022. That calculates out to a 1.1 bushel an acre yield advantage over the untreated check. If we look at the data for the positive yield responses, and as Kirsten outlined, this product isn't taking energy from the plant, it's utilizing that methanol in as a natural byproduct of the breakdown and growth in the cells, then certainly we can recognize that there's no real negative impact to this type of a product. So focusing on the positives, 2.1 bushel an acre is the average yield increase on those 27 trials where we saw the positive tick. So really an exciting opportunity to enhance the availability of nitrogen and sort of improve that nitrogen use efficiency as well. So it's not just about purely supplying that, but also in maybe bridging when there's that gap in nitrogen availability. So if we look at the next slide, we'll look at some of the standout results. So in Birch River, Manitoba, for instance, the previous crop had been wheat. It was under conventional tillage and there was a base fertility of 100 pounds of nitrogen that was available. The application timing at 5 leaf is well within the guidelines of when we're expecting to apply this product. It's basically that ground cover, as Trevor was mentioning. And we know that the greatest amount of nitrogen uptake or need from the canola plant is basically from that 5 leaf until full flower, as we saw in those curves that Trevor presented earlier. So ideal timing, and we can see that there was a 51.8 bushel an acre yield with Utrisha N, which was a 3.2 bushel an acre improvement over the untreated control. You'll notice with Birch River, Mossley, and Hamiota in 2021, or you won't notice, it's not here on the slide, but one of the things that we should note is that these are areas where we did see more adequate moisture during the growing season. In Mossley, with, again, wheat is the previous crop, probably a fairly typical rotation for most, it was a no-till system. And we are aware that there's some impact of tillage on some of the endophytic bacteria that are in the soil already. So we do try to keep track of some of that information to see if we can start to fine-tune the trends of when we're seeing a positive yield response and when we're not. Now, Mossley with 170 pounds of nitrogen, that seems like an ample source. So you wouldn't really expect to see an impact of an additional nitrogen source, and yet we can see that there was a 7 bushel an acre yield advantage with the Utrisha N application over the untreated control. Just really speaking to the fact that sometimes it's not about the amount of nitrogen that's available in the soil, but more about having that consistent source for the plant to be utilizing throughout the growing season to ensure that you are optimizing the yield of that plant. And then a similar trend in Hamiota with wheat again as the previous crop under a min-till system, 126 pounds of nitrogen, 4 leaf as the application timing. So again, getting that sweet spot where we're getting colonization of the plant and then going into that period where we have increased nitrogen demand from the plant and just optimizing that yield potential, seeing a 5.2 bushel an acre yield increase over the untreated check. So again, some real standouts in a relatively dry year where we had other experiences where nitrogen wasn't the limiting factor. So some pretty massive opportunity with canola. What does that look like for one of the other favorite crops in Western Canada, with wheat, we're looking at even a better success rate at 68% of the time, seeing a yield increase with the application of Utrisha N. And we know with any type of trials that there's going to be those situations where we see a little bit of a negative for something that's completely unrelated. Maybe it's where we put the trial, all sorts of different reasons why we might see that negative. So important to note that we're showing you all of the data, whether we win or lose, just so that you get the full picture. So 1.7 bushel an acre on 34 site years with the application of Utrisha N as an improvement over the untreated check. If we focus primarily on where we had that positive yield response, it is an actual average of 2.8 bushels an acre when we had that Utrisha N kick in and show that positive yield response. So again, some very good data collected in 2021 and 2022. If we deep dive into some of the data from 2021 again, which we'll show on the next slide. Again, a cross section from Alberta, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan, trying to show the full picture with our tillage system plus our base rate of nitrogen, in addition to the timing of that application of Utrisha N. And you'll notice that it was fairly consistent at that 4 to 5 leaf stage for application timing. Again, going back to that, opportunity to assess the field, make sure that we have the right stage of growth, that we are seeing the opportunity that there might need to be a little bit of supplemental N in some of these areas within the field, and we can go in and do the foliar application, and voila, we have a fairly consistent 4.1 to 4.5 bushel an acre yield increase over these 3 sites in very different conditions. Of course, the crop rotation was fairly similar, but the tillage systems were somewhat different, and the base rate of nitrogen was completely different. Again, speaking to that real impact of having that consistent source of nitrogen right in the plant, not relying just on the roots to be able to access that fertility. And if we look at the next slide, we are now expanding into corn, which for some of you may not be the crop that you're growing. And for some of us, it's one of our favorite crops to grow because it does love nitrogen. And so we've seen, again, a number of sites, 78 this time. So a fairly substantial accumulation of data for corn across Eastern and Western Canada. And we had a yield advantage 65% of the time. So again, you can see that real consistency, regardless of which crop we're looking at, that we're noticing that 65, 70% win rate happening with all the trials. With corn, we're seeing a 2.3 bushel an acre increase over the untreated check when we look at the entire amount of data. And if we focus in on those where we had a positive yield advantage in the trial, where that Utrisha kicked in and actually, really showed what it can do, then we saw a 5.4 bushel an acre yield advantage over the untreated check. And so again, looking at some of the positive responses, in 2021, again, keeping in mind that we saw some drought in some areas, certainly more representation from Eastern Canada where there was a little bit more moisture. So 2 sites in Ontario and 1 in Manitoba. And obviously different previous crops. Conventional tillage is more common in Ontario, while we had minimum tillage in Hamiota. And then our base fertility was quite different as well. Shockingly, for me anyway, the application timing of V10 in Hamiota would seem a little bit late. I prefer to try to get it on as early as I can, just try to optimize those colonies forming and getting into the plant as quickly as possible so that we can be there for the full growing season. But even at that later application timing, just seeing a phenomenal yield increase. So in Hamiota, 11 bushels an acre. In Ontario, 8.5 and 9.5 bushel an acre yield improvement over those untreated controls, and some pretty phenomenal yields in those corn fields as well. And so I guess that leads to the question of how do we apply it to get the biggest bang for our buck? And so one of the things that we should note is that this is a dry formulation, which is fantastic as far as ease of use. It's lightweight, easy to carry around. The case has 2 bags in it, 5.39 kilograms per bag. Treats 40 acres per bag, so 80 acres a case, rain fast within an hour, and it goes into solution really well. So if you look at that picture there, that is from one of my growers sending me a video saying, look, it goes into solution really quickly. It's easy to handle. It doesn't foam. It doesn't do anything. It just disappears into the solution quite quickly. So again, if we look at how do we get that biggest bang for our buck, our recommendations are to apply to a healthy crop that's unaffected by poor nutrition or other stresses, whether that's drought or excess heat, whatever that might be, and recognizing that if the crop is being stressed, that this isn't a band-aid, but rather we're looking to be optimizing potential when there is a nitrogen limitation. And so that's really where we're trying to make sure with that foliar application that we've had the time to look at the crop, see where we might need to top dress or add in another source, and then taking advantage of that opportunity with this biological product. We do want to apply it to sufficient plant biomass so that we're getting, I call it spraying green, so that we're getting it onto the plant. We really don't need to get it onto the soil because we're not infecting the roots. We're actually looking for it to go into those stomata, as Kirsten mentioned earlier. And so it's really important that not only do we spray the leaf and get good coverage of that leaf, we should also make sure that those stomates are open. And the perfect time to do that is in the morning. That is when the plant has had the night to sort of do its transpiration, and we have that opportunity for those stomates to be open. Our temperatures are most reasonable for this product. Again, it is a live bacteria. And after it's rehydrated in this solution, then it becomes active on that leaf surface. So if we have a temperature somewhere between 15 and 25 degrees, that's ideal in order to get it to be active and move to those stomates, be attracted to that methanol. And so one of the other ways that we can enhance that is by ensuring that we're applying it with enough water volume. The other side to that coin is making sure that our relative humidity is between 30 and 50%. It would be the ideal. Of course, you know, there's some give and take there, but 30 to 50% really helps us to have a leaf surface that is somewhat moist, allows the movement of those bacteria again, but not too wet so that there's droplets falling off of the leaf. So important to try to, you know, optimize that. A couple of other notes. We do want the total chlorine content of water to be less than 2 parts per million. And in most of the testing that I've done when I've been applying it, really, we rarely see that we're getting to levels that are higher than that. And then a pH between 5 and 8. Most of the water that we've utilized, that I've seen as well, has been between 5 and 8. And if there does need to be an adjustment there, we know that there are products on the market that can help us out with that. So the best part, the funnest part, of course, is looking at some of the pictures from the field. And my favorite crop is corn. So you will see a few of them. I think we mentioned in the biographies that I am based in Manitoba. So there is a couple more Manitoba slides here than anything else because that is where I play. So this is corn at Lenore. And it has the untreated on the left-hand side of the screen, a Utrisha N application on the right-hand side of the screen, certainly seeing more biomass accumulation, a more vigorous growth of that corn, and leading to, you know, the opportunity to have more photosynthesis, more biomass accumulation, and greater yields. We go to the next slide. We've got a couple of other pictures from some different areas. So the slide on the left is actually from one of our US sites, and then it's hard to read on the slide or on the picture on the right, but it does say that in that black print on the tire. So I should work on my labeling, definitely. But Utrisha N is on the right, so that larger plant. And again, you can see from the growth stages here that we went in decently early when there was sufficient ground cover, but again, looking to make sure that we're covering the plant, not the soil. And then one final slide from Carmen, Manitoba. And again, on the left-hand side, this one's not labeled perfectly either. The left-hand side, Utrisha N, you can see the little N just poking through on the sign. And then on the right-hand side, no Utrisha. And again, significant improvement in biomass accumulation and just vigor of those plants. Really surprising to me to see that. This site in particular was not limited by moisture. And the other thing that I should really mention about this site is that there was no limitation on nitrogen. And the reason I know this is because this was one of my sites where I did the fertility, and we were very generous in the fertility program here. No nutrient would be limiting within this. And yet, again, you're seeing that improvement and that response by just making sure that you've got that consistent supply of nitrogen in the plant ready for when there might be limitations otherwise. And I think that might wrap up my experiences.
Thank you, Tammy. Perfect. So we'll move into the last couple of slides, and I can see that there's questions and comments in the chat. So we will address those at the end here, just in a couple minutes. But now that we've really spent some time talking about nitrogen and talking about Utrisha N and the biostimulants, just wanted to take a couple of seconds and talk to you a little bit about the Corteva Biologicals portfolio. And so, certainly Utrisha N is a part of this biologicals portfolio. So this is a new portfolio for Corteva, certainly an area of utmost importance for Corteva. And I just want to spend a little time talking about what Corteva Biologicals mean, what really the commitment is with the portfolio, and really the types of products that we intend to bring into this. So really, when we look at how Corteva is a little bit unique in this growing market and in this growing space, it's really because when we look at products, bringing biological products into this portfolio, we're really trying to bring products that are ultimately perform and ensure that your farms and your customers remain productive for today, but also looking ahead into the future. And we'll talk a little bit about that one onto the next slide. But, how can we use biological products to really complement our already existing and innovative farming practices to help with, some of the new and emerging challenges that you all face every day. So certainly, areas like resistance management, improving ROI, which is, what Utrisha N intends to do, and ultimately preserving our farming and our land for the future. So that's really the intent of the portfolio. And when we bring biologicals in, really they are given a very extensive evaluation to them, and really looking to ensure that they deliver to all of you in three key areas. So this is really what the Corteva biological commitment is, and the portfolio stands for. So first and foremost, the products need to work. They need to perform. So all of our biologicals are, very thoroughly tested and ensure that they consistently deliver. And Tammy spent some time going through the data, what we've seen in the field, and certainly that would mirror very much what we've seen in internal trials as well. You see that very consistent and high win rate, and ensuring that they have that proven predictable performance. So that is a box that certainly needs to be checked. The other one is that bringing biologicals that ultimately complement our existing farming practices. And I think Utrisha N fits really nicely in this one. So bringing solutions that fit into farming operations that are relevant, that bring real value, but then very nicely complement some of our existing practices. And so really making sure that, how can we bring products in to tackle some of those new and emerging challenges that provide more value, but also fit really nicely into what our current farming practices are today. And then as our markets continue to change, as our business continues to change, as preferences and trends continue to change, how do we use biologicals as a really great tool to ensure that we meet and all of those changing market expectations? So thinking about things like marketability, the ever-changing consumer preferences, and all the while ensuring that we are, boosting ROI and ensuring that farms stay more and more profitable and productive. So really, when those are really the three key premises, and we look at how we look at biologicals, the value that they can certainly provide, and sort of the evaluation that we put those through before bringing them to all of you. So with that, just want to say a big thank you. We're going to open it up for questions. I'll leave it on this slide as we go through those. You can see here is the code for those of you that are wanting those CCA credits. So go ahead and scan that code. And just want to take a second to say thank you. So maybe I'll ask Tammy and Trevor to come back on. And maybe Trevor, I'll ask you to sort of facilitate the question period if you've got that open as well.
Sure, sounds good. Lots of great questions in here. So if you've been following along, I've been trying to type along as fast as I can to provide as many answers as we can in the time that we have. So for the ones I haven't gotten to yet, I'll maybe just go through a couple here quickly. First one from John is this an organic product? I'll maybe throw that to you, Kirsten.
Yes, that's a really great question, John. So we have our OMRI certification for this one, as well as our EcoCerts certification. So yes, absolutely, this would fit as a valid organic option.
Can we tank mix with glyphosate? Well, you go ahead, Kirsten.
Oh, you go ahead, and I can wrap that one.
Yeah, I had a similar question that I already had an answer to. We have an approved tank mix list, and that is, I believe, publicly available, I think, Kirsten, on our website. So for a list of the products that we have an approval tank mix list for, just check that out. With specifically glyphosate, no, we are not. We don't have ability to tank mix with Utrisha. And a lot of this is not about the sprayer or the sprayer lines, the sprayer tank, the nozzles, that sort of thing. This is about keeping the bacteria from Utrisha alive. And so sometimes we think about compatibility and gelling and sprayer issues, but this is all about keeping the bacteria alive. So anything to add there, I guess, Kirsten?
Yeah, and as Trevor mentioned, the list is available on the website, or certainly from any Corteva sales representative. But I will note that that's a sort of an ever-changing list as we continue to test and look for options for that one. And so really, keep checking in that one as that list continues to grow. And really that list, I think, is it's really about, as everything is with the biological portfolio, and as we introduce and bring products to market, really our commitment is to provide as much information as possible to all of you, be as absolutely transparent and provide as much product information. And so we are, really making sure that we test all of the options, provide really great information to you to ensure, as Trevor mentioned, the viability of the bacteria, which is obviously a critical component of it functioning properly for you. So really, that's our commitment, to provide as much information and do as much research and provide great information to all of you.
Can I just add that one of the things that's important to note is that each formulation is different. So just because the active ingredient is approved, it unfortunately means that we do need to drill down to the microscopic, like, does it have a biofungicide? Does it have a solvent that's not compatible? What does it have in the formulation? So it's so specific that there is a lot of testing that needs to be done. It's not just the active ingredient, it's formulation specific. And the other thing to note that as a practical person out in the field, I want to just mention is that when you are tank mixing it, of course, it's the last thing to go into the tank. We're making sure that bacteria stays alive. So we've fully diluted any other chemicals that are in the tank first before we add in the bacteria and then apply it as quickly as possible to ensure that bacteria viability.
A couple more questions here since we have a little bit of time. Have there been studies on shifting of the population of methylotrophs in the microbiome of the leaves of various crops? Do either you know the answer to that one?
There is so much work being done on
Okay.
biologicals and all of the different bacteria, not only in the soil, but how they work in the leaves, all that. So there is far too much information to digest, and it's shocking. It surprised me how many different types of bacteria are effective at even accessing nitrogen, let alone how they interact in the plant. So has there been some studies on shifts? Yes. Do I know the answers to all of that? No, and I don't think anyone does yet. I think there's much more work to be done here.
Melinda asks a question about how much plant nitrogen can be supplied by Utrisha, in brackets as a percentage. Tammy?
Again, I think it's a very complex answer. It's going to depend on how well is your plant growing? How effectively did we colonize? What are some of the other limiting factors to that plant growth? And so to have a cut and dried answer today, I do not have one. I think that, again, it's important to be applying this to a plant that is healthy, that is potentially going to have nitrogen as a limitation, and that we're supplementing a base fertility program rather than trying to reduce that fertility and have something lack early. This is really sort of that optimization of yield potential by additional nitrogen later in the season when we know that there's that good crop opportunity. So as a percentage, I don't have a number, and Kirsten or Trevor, if you have more information, please feel free to jump in here.
Well,
No, the only thing I would add, I guess, is just that, you know, we think we might be applying enough nitrogen to our fields because we've got this big number in our fertility blend or our fertility program, but Utrisha is still going to be there to help address the variability within the field. So
Yes.
there's going to be spots in the field that will not have enough nitrogen, and Utrisha will be there to help that plant, you know, kind of work through that to produce as much seed as it possibly can. So it's you know, we tend to think of our field as one big consistent thing, but it's not, and that's where a product like Utrisha can help address some of those concerns on a field. What about use on pasture and hayland?
Yes, so the label is available online. It is actually a significant label. So we talked about really some of the core crops today, you know, with corn and canola and wheat, but there are a great number of specialty crops on there, pasture and hay, a number of forage crops on there, some various grasses, and I couldn't even summarize them all today, and the label continues to grow. So it is actually available on many crops, Canadian crops. So I encourage you to go online or reach out to one of us for the label. But that is an option there for sure.
How do we compare to Envita? What information are we gathering there? Is that Kirsten?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question. You know, I think that, you know, we you know, certainly like to just continue to talk about, you know, Utrisha today, and I think that and really this complemental source to, you know, conventional nitrogen. So I think we'd rather just, you know, continue to talk to the Utrisha and what the performance we've seen. That's the product that we're focused on, and we've been working with in the field. I don't know, Tammy, do you want to talk about?
I mean, there are some differences as far as timing. I know that there are definitely differences as far as what that product even looks like and how it gets applied. They are different bacteria as well. They're from different sources. They're just different. It's a really exciting space to be working in. And so I think there will be times where there will be a fit for all of these products, and we are going to work to make sure that we know how to answer that for our products, and I'm sure that our competitors will be looking for their opportunities as well. I think the thing that I really like about ours, that dry formulation goes into solution so nicely. It is very easy to apply, and we really have that opportunity to assess our crop potential before we make the decision to apply it. So we've got some real advantages with our product that I really feel excited about. Trevor, there is one in here that I would love to see us answer.
Sure.
It's
Yes.
about the
Which one?
viability of the bacteria. Someone's using the words CF or the acronym CFU. So they obviously are a supporter of biologicals and know what a colony forming unit is. So this is exciting that someone's asked this question. So Kirsten, are we overbuilt when we're adding in 135 grams per acre of product? Are we ensuring that we have more than adequate amounts of bacteria in that delivery?
Yeah, there's absolutely more than adequate amount of bacteria in there. And and Tammy talked a little bit about this earlier, is that Utrisha is actually a very stable formulation. So we think about temperature and storage. This is one of the more stable formulations. So beyond having an abundance of bacteria, more than what is needed built into it, it's going to be very stable in the handling and storage process. And then of course, once it's in the plant, it will then begin to colonize and divide and grow. So I talked a little bit about how aggressive this bacteria is, how quickly it colonizes, how quickly it grows, and ultimately into that new growth. So yes, there is a very nice population of bacteria that you're getting with this one now.
I love when we can use aggressive and it's a good thing.
Two more questions. I've boiled this down to here now. Do we have third-party controlled trial test results? Can we comment on that?
And that's a good question. I would say that we're spending some time doing that work now. So, continue to ask us questions and look for that data, and we'll make that available as we continue to collect that. So, with this one, we've done, Tammy showed, 2 significant years of testing in the field across the country. Certainly we've done internal testing, and as we continue to learn more about biologicals in this product and share it with all of you, we're going to run another extensive trial program this year, and we're just going to continue to test, continue to provide data, but collecting third-party data would be a priority for us as well.
And last question I think I see here is about price of Utrisha. So if you can comment on that, maybe Kirsten.
Yeah, I mean, I would ultimately just suggest that you talk to your local retailer about pricing of Utrisha. That's where you're going to get the best information. You can also talk to your Corteva territory manager as well about pricing and opportunities with this one. So you can get that information from there. Absolutely.
I think that wraps up the questions. Hoping we addressed most of the questions that are there. So I'll maybe hand it over to you, Michelle or Kirsten.
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you all very much. That was a really great presentation, and thanks to everyone who joined us and for all the questions. That was great to see that so active. So thank you again. If you have any further questions following the presentation, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'll do our best to have your questions forwarded and answered by the team. But yeah, again, before we end today, here is your last chance to collect 0.5 of a CCA CU in nutrient management. So to collect the credit for this webinar, you can open your CCA app on the smartphone and scan the course code there, the QR code, and then your CEUs will be submitted immediately. And but if this doesn't work for you, please feel free to email us your first name, last name, and CCA number, and that can come right to us at topcrop@annexbusinessmedia.com, and we'll be sure to share that with the team as well. And again, a follow-up email will be sent within about 24 hours and we'll hold the recording of the webinar, and again, another email address in case you want to reach out and have any further questions. So thanks again to our presenters and to Corteva for sponsoring today's webinar. And don't forget to visit topcropmanager.com/webinars to view this webinar as a recorded video. Thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.
Take care.